folks, this is Abel James, and welcome to the Fat Burning Man Show, where we talk about real food and real results. Today's special guest is Nora Gedgaudas, an international best-selling author of Primal Body, Primal Mind, and a fellow brain geek. Now, some pretty exciting news. The Fat Burning Man Show has been sitting on top of the health charts in the UK, US, Canada, Australia, and most other English-speaking countries, which is pretty cool, although I've been getting a lot of emails from marketers trying to swarm me with offers to sell their fat-blasting shakes or nutritional supplements or protein powders and all this other crap that you guys certainly don't need and you deserve better. So I've politely told a lot of those folks to go shove it. As you know by now, I'm not a big fan of advertising, and I appreciate your support. So if you'd like to keep the show advertising free, I've set up some buttons on my website, fatburningman.com, on the sidebar and also at the bottom of the post. And you can donate just as little as $1, and every little bit helps. And when you do, as a special thanks, I've set it up so you can download a couple of my books for free. So head on over to fatburningman.com if you'd like to support the show. So as I mentioned, Nora Gedgaudas is the author of the groundbreaking international best-selling book Primal Body, Primal Mind, Beyond the Paleo Diet for Total Health and a Longer Life. Nora is board-certified in holistic nutrition and is recognized by the Nutritional Therapy Association as a certified nutritional therapist. She's the real deal. And she's also a board-certified neurofeedback specialist and maintains a private neurofeedback and nutritional consultation practice in Portland, Oregon. So as some of you folks already know, I'm actually traveling around the country right now with less than reliable internet service. So my connection to Nora on this call was at times less than stellar. So there are a couple of garbled words in there. So I hope that you bear with us. It's still a killer interview, and Nora has a lot of really interesting things to say. And I promise I'll be back in Austin by mid-November, and we'll have a much more reliable internet connection. So we can all look forward to that. All right, so in the show, Nora and I talk about why so many people fail on Atkins, what it's like to live by the Arctic Circle among wild wolves, how you can limit your exposure to EMF pollution, and how Nora lost 25 pounds without exercise eating butter by the stick. All right, let's go hang out with Nora. All right, folks, today we're here with Nora Gedgaudas, a clinical neurotherapist and author of the wonderful Primal Body, Primal Mind. How are things on the West Coast, Nora?
The West Coast is absolutely gorgeous today. We have cool temperatures and clear skies, and, fall is in the air, and you got that sort of magical lighting going with the sun at the angle that it occupies in the sky this time of year, and it's just very nice. And it's a Friday, so how bad can it be?
Nice. That was very poetic. I liked that a lot. Awesome. So I'd like to start with this. Can you give us a little bit of background about how you became interested in the evolutionary approach to nutrition, physiology, and the brain as well?
Oh, man. Well, you say this is only like an hour-long program.
Right.
It's such a convoluted trail. I took up an interest in nutrition back when I was in my teens, and began sort of devouring, if you will, books on the subject in a variety of ways, and took up study of sort of nutritional science in college, and I was also interested in anthropology, and I at one point, had started to pursue a double major in those things, but I couldn't imagine for the life of me, this is how compartmentalized my thinking was at the time, how those two things could possibly mesh. So anyway, long story short, I eventually came across the work of Weston Price, and I think that was what opened the floodgates for me, the awareness that, of the way in which our ancestors ate and how different that was from mainstream recommendations about what, constitutes a healthy diet. And that opened the door to me to thinking more in terms of our more distant ancestors, and how the nutritional, how the diets of those people that were our earliest ancestors would have possibly shaped our physiological makeup and our nutritional requirements, how that might reflect on what our needs are today. And so I kind of started down that path, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago now. And it's been in and of itself a gradual evolution, again, if you will, no pun intended. But
I'm a
and
sucker for puns.
yeah, exactly. Thinking about this, one other thing that did have a rather profound influence for me was that I actually spent, I've again, my life has been very cross-disciplinary.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of different things along the way, and one of the things I did one year was I spent a whole summer of my life living less than 500 miles from the North Pole with a family of wild wolves.
Really?
Yes, yeah, long story. Fairly industrial strength religious experience, and
Oh my
pretty
gosh.
transformative for me on a lot of levels. And I was there basically helping to conduct behavioral research, and I was in the company of within that genre, a very famous wolf biologist. His name was Dr. L. David Meach. He's a dear friend, and he was quite well known for his work with wolves all over the world. Arguably, the world's foremost scientific expert on the wolf.
Wow.
And he had found this family of wolves back in 1986 up there on northern Ellesmere Island, and was going up every single summer and spending the summers basically, he had managed to habituate to this family of wolves, found the den and all that, and every summer went and lived among them. And one year I got invited along, and so spent the whole summer there. In fact, at one point he came back down to Minnesota because he had some business to conduct. So he had sort of left me up there, and then he came back a couple weeks later, and but it was a profound experience on a lot of levels. And one of the things, and we're so digressing here, one of the things that struck me is that I'm sitting out there on a permafrost laden tundra, and it's a bit of a thermal oasis there, and there's definitely plant life growing and everything else in this particular area.
Mm-hmm.
But there's permafrost just under the ground. And I'm looking over this landscape, and there are the remnants of all these ancient human cultural sites all over the place in the area where this wolf den is. Some of these sites have never been touched by archaeologists.
Amazing.
So you can see, the bones of the animals that they hunted, some of the tools laying around, some different things. And I found myself, and at the time, I was eating a mostly vegetarian diet. It wasn't totally vegetarian by any stretch of the imagination, but at the time, I kind of had it in my head that was probably the healthier way to be. And so I was eating all these, fresh vegetables all the time, which I still do, by the way. I probably still eat more vegetables than most vegetarians do, but I just really hadn't thought it out well enough. And there I am sitting on the tundra, and like the last thing on my mind was a salad. All that summer, all I did was sit there, look out over this frozen landscape, and all I could think about was fat-rich food. In fact, I sat there on my duff, and I ate bags and bags of nuts. We brought all these provisions with us. There was some hunting that we did. There were other things that we brought that were packaged, and I was eating, salami and cheese, and and I was just obsessed with butter. And
Yeah.
we go to there was a weather station some distance away from us that we made a pilgrimage to about once a week so that we could, thank you, take showers, and maybe make a 5-minute phone call back home, and all that thing. And so the OIC, at the officer in charge at the station, knew about us and gave us permission, when we came at usually 3 in the morning. It was 24-hour daylight, so you couldn't really tell if it was 3 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon. And said, you're welcome to come in and use our facilities and make a quick phone call, very quick. And if there's any food laying out in the mess hall, you're welcome to it. Well, they always had this great big bowl of butter. And then they had bread sitting off to the side, which at the time made a great vehicle for the butter for me.
Sure.
I would take, a slice of bread, I'd toast it, and I'd put about an inch of butter on it. And I just stand there, hovered over this little station, and I would make slice after slice, and it wasn't the bread, it was the butter.
Yeah.
And I thought, what the heck am I doing to myself, doing this? But it was an interesting obsession. And as I sat there and thought about it, I realized that fat would have been pretty gosh darn important to the people who lived at these sites that came across along the way, that vegetables were not a particularly practical food. I was eating fat-rich food, and I couldn't stop eating. And by the way, I lost about 25 pounds that summer.
Really? Wow. That is interesting.
Got almost no exercise at all. Because we were mostly sitting around watching wolves sleep, or, watching them play around the den or whatever. And if we followed them on their hunts, we were on four-wheelers when we did that. So, I would take walks occasionally in the evening, but there was not a whole lot of physical activity involved with this. And if, in fact, if we stood up and walked around at all while the wolves were hanging around the den and they could see that, it was rather upsetting to them. They were totally cool with us as long as we just sat there.
Yeah.
If we walked around. So I found myself sitting there wiggling my toes a lot, trying to stay warm, layers and layers of stuff. But the thing that your body uses to keep you warm is primarily fat.
Yeah.
And so my furnace was stoked. I was burning logs, as I'm sure you're familiar with that analogy that I kind of getting to be known for now. And not bothering with very much kindling at all, because it just didn't make sense. And I lost a ton of weight. And I never forgot the lesson of that in the course of my interest in nutrition, which just really took a new turn between that experience, which was really a big seed that got planted in my mental state. And then as soon as the Weston Price thing, as soon as I came across that material, it just exploded.
Wow.
In a whole direction. And so that was a catalyst for me. And it's gone through multiple evolutions. It's gone through evolutions since the time I published my book.
Really?
And my thinking keeps growing in these areas, and I become better and better at distilling things down, at thinking things through. I'm pretty careful about my facts these days. I become increasingly convinced that the central role that fat really plays in our physiological makeup and should be playing in our dietary makeup.
Yeah.
And so it's led me to where I am now. And of course, I don't know if you attended my talk at AHS 12 or not.
I did, yeah.
Cool. So the whole ketogenic approach to things, I decided rather than come at this from the standpoint of carbs are bad, and I we've all grown weary of that whole debate. Well, some people just, they're almost OCD about it, and that's all they can think about, and they're just sort of brown. Everybody's sort of tired of it, but people occasionally keep asking, and but I'm thinking, I need to come at this from a different standpoint, because it's not just about the idea that carbs maybe aren't the best thing for our health, but it's how important that really is.
Yeah.
There's the old Atkins approach to ketogenics, which is eat lots of protein.
Right.
Which isn't really a true ketogenic diet, as it turns out.
Because it becomes sugar, yeah.
Because your body will metabolically convert and burn that protein. It's not that it spikes your blood sugar to eat a chicken breast or something like that. There was a big thing online recently where somebody did all this research and they said, well, it didn't spike my blood sugar at all. Well, no, it's not going to spike your blood sugar, but you are going to, if you've been accustomed to burning carbohydrates as your primary source of fuel, and your body has come to expect that, your body will become eminently efficient at converting whatever it can to that fuel as well, if that fuel is immediately available. And protein is the next most logical thing, and it will do it on an as-needed basis. So you're not spiking your blood sugar, but you're still perpetuating that same metabolic cycle in the process. Right. And I think why so many people failed on Atkins, because they never really ceased to be sugar burners in a manner of speaking. Dove into all kinds of carb substitutes and all that crazy stuff. So they maintained that weird processed substitutes for carbs, most of which were soy-based, and don't even get me started. But they also over-consumed protein-rich foods in the belief that you couldn't over-consume protein-rich foods. And that's, I think that understanding, or that way of thinking, has shifted some in the consciousness of the paleo community, and even some of the leadership of the paleo community that previously promoted protein-based diets. fat is sort of a free metabolic fuel. It doesn't seem to have, ironically, it's the one thing that's been most vilified
Mm-hmm.
throughout the last 100 years, and it probably is the single most important component if you want to relegate, something being more important than something else. Fat seems to have a real central role to play in the functioning of our brain and nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
in our cellular membranes, in the way we manufacture our hormones, and maintaining also healthy energy levels.
Mm-hmm.
And we are designed to burn one of two types of fuel. And we'll burn either carbohydrates, in other words, glucose, or we will burn fat,
Mm-hmm.
or free fatty acids and ketones.
Right.
And that's what we're designed to do. And different fuels have different values under different circumstances. But I don't think we were ever designed to rely on glucose as our primary source of fuel. And
Right.
yet that's taught in medical schools. That's what's taught to conventional nutritionists and dietitians. And I don't know if you saw the article that, oh gosh, I don't even know if I still have it up on my computer at all here. I can look around. There was, there was a blog post written by somebody by the name of Dr. Briffa, who I think is over in Great Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And the title of his blog post was "Diabetic Transforms His Health with a Low-Carb Diet, and His Doctor Urges Him to Eat More Carbs."
I did read that. Totally absurd and so common too.
Yeah, that particular diabetic, I mean, just to bang my own or blow my own horn for a second, it turns out had read my book and had decided to make major changes to his diet based on what he read in my book, and
Mm-hmm.
it transformed health. It transformed his markers all went into just beautiful normal ranges, and his physician said, "Oh my God, this is amazing. What are you doing?"
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Well, actually, I've given up carbs and I'm eating all this fat and whatever." And he blanched, and I think it's maybe his heart stopped beating for a second, and then he immediately just started, in a worried fashion, saying, "Well, you have to eat starch. You just have to." Or he said carbs, and he said, "Well, I am. I'm eating vegetables." He says, No. You have to eat starch." That's the way physicians are trying to think.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, we all know you don't go to medical school to study health. You go there to study disease and how to treat the symptoms of disease
Mm-hmm.
with basic pharmaceutical agents and surgical and other expensive medical procedures. And medicine, somewhere during World War II, ceased really to become a profession and became an industry,
Mm-hmm.
and very profit-oriented industry. And
Mm-hmm.
so we have as a healthcare system today, of course, is primarily a disease management system. Nobody's really profiting from foundational thinking and restorative measures to health.
Yeah.
It's more about, you can't do anything about a disease once it takes hold, so let's just treat the symptoms and, hope for a good outcome and then take out whatever undertaking industry. But
It is, unfortunately. And I'm trying to have more and more doctors who are coming on board with this overall message in this community, because we need more and more of them. And it's even my own doctor, when I go in, it's pretty hopeless, unfortunately. it seems. And I've tried it to talk about fat versus sugar burning as well. I've tried it both ways, and I've been a fat burner for quite some time now, a few years. But I can say, and my background, in the brain and psychology and all of that really fascinates me with the way that my brain feels when I'm using different fuels. And it's pretty shocking, the difference. It really is a roller coaster ride when you're burning sugar. And, I've run marathons and all of that. I've always been a runner. And so they say that you need to eat lots of starches, lots of sugar, those little goo packs and all of that. And it's kind of like nitrous for a car. You are supercharged for a little while, but then you get sick or you
Right.
crash. And I can say, being a fat burner primarily now, there's something that is just, it feels almost more regulated. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but I feel centered. I feel much more balanced, and I feel like I can think much more clearly.
And you can, as a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
There was an interview between Peter Attia and Oh my God, I forgot his name now. He spoke right after I did at AHS 12.
Okay.
But at any rate, he was talking about the value of ketogenic diets in cognitive functioning, and that it seems to have a particularly enhancing effect on cognitive functioning, which it makes perfect sense. The brain is made of fat, and brain needs a tremendous amount of fuel, and nothing provides more energy per calorie or per gram or whatever than dietary fat. And ketones in particular is what the brain is really beautifully designed to make use of. In fact, we're born in a state of ketosis.
So interesting.
We're literally born to rely on fat as our primary source of fuel. And that have the quote from the Journal of Neuroscience Research states that once the onset of suckling takes place, ketone bodies become the major fuel for brain development. So, and of course, apart from coconut oil and palm kernel oil, the richest natural source of medium chain fats, which are the most ready source of ketones, is human breast milk. They're not saying that, yes, we have so much sugar in breast milk to fuel the human brain. They're saying that the brain basically runs when we're born off of ketones.
Right.
And it's not until we introduce a carbohydrate-based diet that people start to overly rely on ketones. So, it was Dr. Andreas Einfeld. That was his name.
That sounds familiar. I think I was taking a coffee break after your talk, unfortunately. Well, let's talk a little bit about ketosis for the people who are just kind of dipping their toes into this lifestyle, who might not be fully aware of what it means. And it can be a scary topic. I know a lot of doctors are scared off. I think you mentioned in your book, most people, when they think of ketosis, they think of ketoacidosis, which is very different. So can you just kind of give a basic primer about these two different things?
Yeah, well, ketosis is a state in which we're, very simply defined. It is a state in which you're relying on fat as your primary source of fuel. I don't know who wouldn't want that, right? I mean, that's to put it in that state, put it in that context is the simplest way of putting it. Diabetic or ketoacidosis, it's most commonly manifest in what you call untreated type 1 diabetes. This is a pathological metabolic state, and it's marked by extreme and uncontrolled ketosis, in which normal ketosis is a real functional aspect of fat-based energy metabolism, and that tends to be induced by either prolonged fasting or a very low carbohydrate diet. Acidosis, what happens is that your body has keto acids that basically alter the pH of your blood pretty substantially. They'll lower the pH, make you highly acidic, and that's a potentially life-threatening condition. We're all supposed to be walking around with a pH somewhere between 7.35 and 7.45. People in state of ketoacidosis, when you start to dip too far, you start to go in either direction too far. So fasting or consuming a diet very low in carbohydrate is going to, even in a type 1 or type 2 diabetic person, is really going to lead to a state of ketosis, but not ketoacidosis. Ketoacidosis is a fairly rare condition, and unfortunately the two get conflated together. And I think that it was, Jane Brody of the New York Times who, popularized the idea that ketones were toxins, and that, we need to avoid the production of ketones at all costs. Well, that's, of course wrong. And in fact, it's an incredibly important and viable source of fuel for us. When you first decide to go on a low carbohydrate diet, your body is going to start manufacturing ketones. And a lot of people run out and they buy those urinary keto sticks, at the drugstore, and they pee on them. Look at all the ketones on me. I'm in ketosis. Well, that's just not accurate. I mean, you're probably producing a lot of ketones, but you may not yet be adept at making use of them. You know, like putting diesel into a gasoline engine, you know, it's in there, it's in there circulating, but you may not be able to make use of it.
Right.
As it takes time to make that metabolic conversion to relying on sugar as that primary source of fuel to one that relies on fat as a primary source of fuel.
Right.
And so just because you're throwing off ketones doesn't mean that you're burning them. And so initially they do get thrown off like a waste product, and people might find that their breath is a little weird, that they're giving off maybe some weird body odor or something. As your body starts to excrete ketones both through your skin and through your bowels and through your urinary tract and whatever else. That's a short thing. That's a very, very temporary condition until your body starts to figure out, wait a second, we're throwing away the only fuel that this person's giving us. We've got to figure out how to make use of it. You know, as your body goes diver on you, it starts the conversions that it needs to suddenly now make use of this much more efficiently produced type of fuel.
Right.
You know, even the slenderest person listening to this program right now has roughly 20 times more stored available fat at their disposal. Doesn't it make sense that would be the design for how we're meant, of what we're meant to make use of?
Yeah.
And so, you know, sugar is rocket fuel. It's designed to kick in as a primary source of fuel during times where we're in a state of fight or flight, or we're exerting ourselves in some extreme anaerobic fashion. That's where it shines. That's, you know, where we're designed to make the best use of it. And you can kind of like to fueling maybe a Formula race car. You know, that race car can really move around the track, and it may look really cool while it's doing it, but is that the car that you really want to take and rely on for your cross-country trip? You know?
I just did one of those, and it's certainly not in a Formula One racer. Now, can we let's go back a little bit to how out of touch we are. Now, a few decades ago, you were pretty much living at the North Pole. I wouldn't imagine there was a heck of a lot of technology around you. These days, it seems like every year or two, there's another gadget that's in our hands or by our bedside, another computer, another TV. So what sort of effect does that have on our physiology and on our brains?
Well, right. So, you know, electromagnetic frequency pollution, of course, is this very, very new thing. You know, I'd say 10 years ago or more, well, more like 15 years ago now, when I first got started in the field of neurofeedback, which is, you know, the brain training stuff that I do.
Right.
A lot of people know about. There was a pretty even mix of people who came in a state of functional underarousal as those coming in a state of functional overarousal. And I know you've got a neuroscience background, so I know you have a grasp of what that is. But when you're in a state of underarousal, you're, you know, as a form of maybe depression, of just sort of a low energy brain state, and where you just can't get it going. And overarousal is more of a chronic state of fight or flight, you know, where people are going to be very anxious, is just kind of a general way of putting it. And we would train accordingly, I should say, based on certain frequencies, certain training frequencies. We'd use higher frequencies for people who were functionally unaroused, and that seemed to work well for them. And it was on a, you know, case-by-case basis. People came in, and we'd make a determination on which direction we thought the training needed to go, and we would select frequencies accordingly and then adjust those frequencies based on people's responses. The years went by that increasingly there seemed to be more and more people coming in that were requiring lower frequency training. And I thought maybe we were just sort of self-selecting or something, although it really did seem to be a changing client population.
Right.
I found that it dialed frequencies lower and lower and lower as time went on, literally to where past a certain point, pretty much everybody was training at low frequencies. And where, just as an example, now this is sort of ancient history and neurofeedback talk now, but back in the early days, we were training like 15 to 18 hertz or whatever for, the average person, or somewhere between 12 and 16 or 17 hertz or whatever for people. And within a span of less than a decade, your average autistic person maybe was training after a while at maybe 6 to 8 hertz or something like that. Nowadays, I don't train anybody that high anymore.
Wow.
People's neurological states seem to be increasingly over-aroused. And most people, I'd say, walking loose, are in some varying state of fight or flight. I won't say everybody is. There's always supposedly exceptions to the rule. But I'm sitting there scratching my head, going, what could possibly account for this shift?
Right.
Our equipment requirements, past a certain point, we all hit basement that we never even thought we'd have a reason to go to. And then, a $10,000 training system became a piece of junk. and buy a whole new system. And I've since bought a whole other system that now gets regular software updates that allows for expanded capability. And, there are people getting trained as low as 1/10,000 hertz.
Wow.
Now, it could be argued that there are things going on at these frequencies that we think that there's central organizing principles at these infralow frequencies that may have had a value to all along, and I think that that's probably true. In fact, we may even be on a glial level with the infralow frequencies that we're training, and it's a different training than it used to be. But what interests me is how we got there.
Yeah,
and that's the question I ask. I'm not saying that that you can't get positive effects from training those higher frequencies in some people anymore.
Yeah,
but I'm saying it's something that drove us to go lower and lower and lower. And some of it was a learning curve, but I'm telling you, some of it was that people just kept needing lower. So anyway, and one thought that came to mind, actually a friend of mine brought it up, was that it might just be EMF pollution. 10 years ago, I knew people that didn't have cell phones. Nowadays, everyone's got them. And regardless of whether we have them, we're all being inundated by these, by this high frequency electromagnetic, sort of pollution. And if you go to a website called antennasearch.com and you type in your zip code, it will tell you how many cell towers you've got within 4 miles of your home. I have 67 cell towers.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and there are like 300 other types of antennas. There's no way to escape those tendrils. They're everywhere. Yeah. And there's no, we know from research, from really well-conducted research now, that EMF pollution will either generate or exacerbate excitatory activity in the brain and nervous system. I actually think, and part of the evolution of my thinking has begun incorporating concepts now, and I don't have that research right in front of me, but there's been some very interesting research published on the effects of space weather on, in other words, solar particles, high-charged now coming in, where the space weather is very, very different now than it was a decade or so ago.
Watch out for that solar wind.
Better believe it. And a weakened magnetic field that is making the effects of those solar particles much more pronounced on our nervous systems. And they do find that during periods where there's solar maximums, there are higher rates. There's more war, there's more unrest, there's more violence, there's more anxiety in populations during those time periods. So I think that there are probably all kinds of I think that there is sort of a convergence of different things coming together. Carbohydrate-based diets are anxiety, and the state of the world that we're in, just from a psychological perspective, is anxiety-provoking. I mean, you'd have to be either living under a rock someplace, or I don't know, completely stone dead from the neck up, to not be stressed out by what's going on in our world, and everything from the economy to our environment to the whole political arena and the whole corporate thing. And we could get all Alex Jones and go really crazy here, but
Yeah.
it's a nutso world that we're in. And so my attitude is, I'm not a fear monger. My attitude about things is I'm not paranoid simply because I am informed. It's not about being informed. And that information, it's not hard to realize that we've got stuff coming at us that our most distant ancestors couldn't have even begun to have fathomed.
Yeah.
It's just a world with very different demands on, we have a very primitive physiology, and the modern world in no way are we designed to deal well with that. There's a lot that's going on that's really outside of the realm of our immediate control. So the drum that I like to beat is that we have to take control of what we can. We don't have the room for error, the room for indulgence that maybe our grandparents or great-grandparents had. I think with each subsequent generation that has suffered the effects of the food industry, for instance, or of environmental degradation, or if you look at the whole sort of pot and cats scenario,
right?
Each subsequent generation becomes increasingly vulnerable, and the current generation, just doesn't have any room for error anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's the idea, that take control of what we can. Let's try to do what we can to take the principles that serve to evolve our physiology and nutritional requirements and apply those to modern conditions, apply those to, modern day longevity science as a means of optimizing these principles. And truthfully, I don't know that it's possible to be optimally healthy anymore.
Yeah.
And if you cannot afford to be sick, and nobody can that I know of, then you can't afford not to eat optimally well.
Right.
And I don't care if somebody else decides that they want to eat their carbs. I'm not here to tell anybody what to do. But my interest is just in saying, this is what I've come across, this is the way I see it, and you can take that information, do with it whatever you please.
Yeah. Now, on that point, this is kind of an interesting one, because I think everyone has a different definition, but we throw around terms like low carb, controlled carb, high carb. Is there a numeric value that you personally assign to that?
Well, I don't know that anybody's ever calculated a safe minimum exposure to, do dietary sugars and starch, because where all sugars glycate, and we're not talking about the controlled enzymatic glycation that we need in order to do our metabolic processes. We also need some free radical activity in order to do our metabolic processes perfectly. That doesn't mean that we need to consume free radicals in order to be healthy.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm going to say about that part. But in order to maintain a state of ketosis, in order to stay in a state of ketosis, we need to kind of stay below a threshold of about 50 to no more than maybe 60 grams of carbohydrates a day. And, that, and the fact is that we don't have to get any of it from dietary sugar or starch.
Right.
You're gonna 5 or 10 grams a day. There's no way to totally avoid glucose or some form of sugar or starch in our diets. There really isn't. So you're roughly going to get 5 or 10 grams of sugars in the protein that you consume every day, in the meats that you consume. You're Another 10 or 15 grams from things like fibrous vegetables. Even though they're primarily, very low carbohydrate, we still get some.
Sure.
There are going to be a few grams in nuts and seeds. A few grams if you decide to eat some fruits or berries. You'll get some of that. And so the idea is to keep it to a minimum if you want to maintain that state of healthful, well-adapted ketosis.
Right.
And, that's the whole thing. It's whatever we choose to do. But if that's what you're wanting to do, that's the way you've got to do it. And not only that, the other trick, and it's kind of an important one that gets overlooked a lot, is that it's really important that we keep our protein consumption to less than about 25 grams or so, which is about roughly 3 ounces or so of meat, fish, or eggs in a single meal. And each ounce of meat is roughly 6 or 7 grams of protein. So just you can use that number 7 if you want. And I oftentimes recommend in the beginning that people get themselves a cheap digital food scale that can measure things in grams and ounces or whatever, and just weigh it out raw before you cook it, so that you get a sense of how much that really is.
Right.
In a meal. And once you get used to doing that, you don't have to do it for very long. I don't like regimens. I don't like having to be overly formulaic when about things, but it's kind of important to get a sense of what you're doing going into this. And then once you get the hang of it, you can eyeball it. After that, that's what I do.
Yeah.
I don't think that every time. There's some people that seem to have a real problem with getting into that fat burning zone, and they're just like, well, I'm just not eating any carbs, and I'm just sticking to the protein and vegetables and whatever. And it's like, okay, you're probably overeating protein.
Yeah.
Could be other things going on as well, and that's something I actually I have amassed a tremendous amount of material now on where people get tripped up, and I'll be doing something with that in the near future. But
very cool.
But one of the easy things you can do, and Jimmy Moore's doing this right now, is you can go out and get yourself a good ketone meter. And I'm not talking about keto sticks. Don't waste your money on those things, the things that you pee on. You're literally measuring ketone levels in the blood. And it's just like a glucometer. You go and you can buy these things online. There are a couple different kinds. Anyway, so by definition, you are in a state of ketosis. You're kind of in a more optimal state of ketosis, somewhere between 1 and 3 millimolars of ketones. So if you have one of these meters, that's what you're shooting for. 1.5, so much the better. That's usually a good threshold of millimolars of ketones. It means that you're in a functional state of ketosis. And so that might be a tool that some people can use to better kind of tailor what they're doing, and it'll help your awareness of what you are and maybe aren't doing right.
Right. So, very interesting. And how much do those run you?
Well, the meters are very inexpensive. Where the expense comes in are, in fact, some diabetic supply companies and things like that literally give the meters away, or they're just maybe 10 or something. But it's the strips, they know they're going to.
That's how they get you.
Now, if you're not a diabetic, though, it doesn't end up being that expensive. And because it can cost anywhere from $3 to $6 for one of those strips, do your measurements once a day. Pick a certain time of day. You're more likely to have low ketone levels in the morning than you are, around the day. So pick a time of day, and do it roughly the same time every day if you can, and just kind of keep tabs on how things are going, and try to make adjustments accordingly. If in doubt, lower the amount of protein you're consuming and increase the amount of fat. Sounds crazy, but some things are so crazy they actually work. So,
and fat is good.
Fat is where
fat is king. So we're coming up on time, but before we go, why don't you tell the folks out there where they can find you and what you're working on now?
Well, you can find me at my website at www.primalbody-primalmind.com. And my book is available through my website. Actually, it's it's a little better for me if you purchase the book through the link on my website, but you can actually find it in many online sources as well as in most of the bookstores out there. It's in just about every bookstore. The stuff I'm working on is really, I've got so many irons in the fire right now. It's hard to know. We're not privy to talk about some of the more exciting stuff, but I have some, collaborations coming up, sort of celebrity collaborations, if you will.
Cool.
That I think are going to be a neat thing. I've got a couple of new ebooks that are going to be coming out. Things that are going to be sort of downloadable, whatever site, that I think are going to be really, really provide some really, really genuinely helpful material for people. I'm going to, of course, be at Paleo FX. I'm also planning to do another tour, or planning to speak again in Australia, and I'm going to be also going to New Zealand next year. And
wow, very cool.
Kinds of things, yeah.
It's an exciting life you live.
It's definitely never a dull moment. Sort of feeling a little drawn and quartered some days, pulled in a lot of different directions. I still have a very active clinical practice, and I'm also planning to do a lot more in the future. Maybe doing less with the clinical practice and more with things going on my website and elsewhere. So be sure when you go to my website to sign up for my my newsletter. Sign up on there. There's going to be a lot more coming in the very near future. A lot of really exciting stuff, and I hope you guys stay in touch.
Awesome. Well, Nora, thank you so much for coming on. This has been really interesting and helpful, and we'll have to have you on again soon.
Thanks, Abel. I really appreciate you inviting me on. It's a real privilege.
You bet. All right. Thanks a lot. That Nora is one smart cookie. If you'd like to hear more from her, you can head to her website at primalbody-primalmind.com. And we'll actually both be speaking at Paleo FX 13 in Austin, so you folks can look forward to that. And remember, if you'd like to keep this show advertising free, please head on over to fatburningman.com and you can see the buttons to donate as little as $1, and I'll send you a couple of ebooks as a special thanks for your support. Now, we have some exciting guests coming up in the next few weeks, including the Paleo Angel, George Bryant from Civilized Caveman, and Carly Randolph Pittman. So stay tuned, and I'll be talking to you guys soon. Cheers.